and a warm welcome to Crown Court on behalf of the Presbyterian of England and the Channel Islands, whose event this is. We're delighted to have the Right Reverend Sally Foster-Fulton, who is this year's moderator of the General Assembly. Delighted to have you with us, Sally.
Thank you very much.
In your London week. And lots of busy appointments, we know, so we hope that this won't be at all stressful. We hope it'll feel like a fireside chat, shall we say, a fireside chat. But it's an opportunity to hopefully get to know you a bit better, a wee window into your life and ministry, but also your year as moderator, we hope. So please give Sally a very warm welcome. I should say we're also delighted to have with us the Principal Clerk, Fiona Smith, so we'll better behave ourselves. And we have also John McPate, the Kirk's Ecumenical Officer, and also David Bradwell, who is the Church's Parliamentary Officer. So delighted to have all of you with us today. So, Sally, now anyone meeting you for the first time would notice that you don't exactly have a West of Scotland accent. So tell us a wee bit about where you were raised, what that was like, how you came into church, all of that.
Okay. I was born and raised in South Carolina. So born in Beaufort, which is on the coast, so near Charleston. And then right before I began primary school, we moved upstate into what's referred to as the Piedmont. So it's the foothills of the Appalachian Mountains. So that's where I grew up. And then when I went to university, my parents moved back to Beaufort, and that's where most of my family are. So that's where I grew up. I grew up in the Presbyterian Church, USA. And yes, I think one of the things that I remember is before I knew I belonged in that community, I felt I belonged in that community. And that's something I think throughout times of intense questioning and doubting and evolving and changing, that's held me there. That there was that sense of you're loved here. And that, I think, helps see people through times of intense and I hope really important questions. If you've ever got a question, don't hide it. Dive into it, because that's what makes your faith alive, you know. And God can handle your questions. And in fact, I think says, bring them on, because that's what it's about.
It's interesting, though, that you mention belonging, because I think sometimes people think in terms of Christian faith as believing, and almost often, certainly any time I've done a communicants class, people feel reticent because they feel they don't believe enough. Or they don't believe enough of the things they're meant to believe. And there's this sense that somehow it's believing that brings you into the community of faith. But actually, what you're saying is the first thing you knew was that you belonged anyway.
Absolutely.
You belonged.
Absolutely. And I think it's so important that we hold on to that when we welcome people. That you know, it's galling sometimes to say, oh, you're welcome here. Well, I'm here. You know, I'm already here. And so, of course, I'm welcomed. What I want to be is included, celebrated, involved, and part of the fabric of what's going on. And so I think we need to, as a church, be very cognizant of that, and of the fact that of course you're welcome here, because you're part of the family of God, and created and loved by God. So, you know, our job is to love each other.
And in terms of, you know, you reached that stage, you went to university, when was it that you felt a call to ministry? How did that evolve in you, do you think?
I think I pushed back on it quite a bit. And to be honest, I think a lot of that had to do with embedded expectation that I wasn't even aware of. I remember my dad always saying, I mean, from the time I was, there's nothing you can't do if you put your mind to it. And when I went to university and I graduated, I had an English degree and Christian education, so I did both. And I was a director of Christian education in a church outside of Atlanta, trying to decide what I wanted to do. And the minister I was working with had been the admissions director at Columbia Seminary. And so we had lots of conversations, and I applied for a scholarship to Columbia, and I won the scholarship, and I was so excited, and I went home to tell my parents, and my dad, nothing. He didn't say anything, and I was really confused, and waited, and then asked my mother a couple of days, said, what is happening here? I don't understand what's going on. And she said, he's really afraid. He's really afraid of what that will mean to the rest of your life.
Interesting.
As a single woman in the South, following that call, what's that going to do? And I thought, well, I just have to go with it. And I did, and it was fine. And we had that conversation years later. And he genuinely said, I was disappointed in myself, but I was afraid for you. Because at that point, I mean, this was 30 years ago, it wasn't the done thing. There weren't very many ministers there weren't very many candidates in the South, in the PCUSA. It was beginning, it was burgeoning, it was emerging.
Interesting.
So it was interesting, yeah.
Yeah. And so when you finished your ministerial education at Columbia, where did and also was that, so tell us about, I suppose, your significant other, and because that also affected your life journey and where you felt called to ministry. So tell us a wee bit about that.
Sure, yeah, I never made it through Columbia because my first year, my flatmate was from Scotland and really homesick. And so they said to the exchange student from Glasgow, you need to go and check on Val, because Val is really homesick. And he knocked on the wrong door and got me. And a year later we got married, and I got the scholarship he had to come to Columbia. I got to go to Trinity in Glasgow, and that's where I finished. So I finished in Glasgow. They asked me to, when I was accepted as a candidate in the Church of Scotland, they said, you need to be steeped in the Scottish tradition. I thought, fair enough, okay. I'll be steeped. And they sent me to Edinburgh to take Scottish church history. So, and at this point, we had 2 toddlers. So I was leaving the toddlers to go to Edinburgh to be steeped in the Scottish tradition. And I walked into the classroom, and the guy teaching the class was from Detroit. And I just thought, just roll with it, Sally. Just roll with it. And it was great, and he was super, and I learned a lot. But that's where it was. But I just embraced it. I felt very at home, and that this was the space to be in. And it was difficult at first, I think, to make that huge transition.
I was going to say, because, I mean, although 2 sister denominations, many things similar, but culturally, South Carolina is a very different place to Scotland, isn't it?
It's a very different place. And I'll be really honest, I think culturally, I didn't struggle as much as weird little things like it's warm in the South. And it stays light in the South. And the first year, I couldn't figure out why I was so tired all the time. And it's because when it gets dark in South Carolina, you stop. And you can't stop at 3:30 in the afternoon in Scotland. So it was an adjustment, and it took time. And I think I was also, scary busy because we had 2 kids. And I was, going to university and had 2 children, and we just moved to a new parish, and there was all sorts of stuff going on. So I think it was you know, I kind of woke up when Alex was 5. And
Yeah.
that's probably what happened, yeah.
So did Stuart finish first and go to a parish,
He
and
did.
then you go with the family and them and settle there?
Yeah, he started off in Hags near Falkirk. When I finished my degree, I started out as chaplain at Falkirk and Royal District Infirmary and the Royal Scottish National Hospital, which was the hospital in Larbert for people with learning disabilities. So I had those two chaplaincies, and they were extraordinary, and I learned so much, and that was before I was ordained. So I was ordained into a parish, but I did that before, and I think really grounded me in that community-based ministry. So many things you could do in that space, and the difference especially with the RSNH. I went into my first parish, was in the same area that the Royal Hospital had been, and they were closing it. And so it was moving people from that community into the community. But there's a screaming difference between being part of a community and being moved into a facility in a community. So helping to move people in that space was really significant, and I think really helpful in bedding into that parish. Is saying we have people in this community who are not part of the community. They're really struggling, and for several of them, they'd never known anything else. You know, they'd been in that hospital for decades. And to take them out of that space and into a community without any safety net or guards or support or transition was really difficult. And I think to have a parish there that got that was really helpful. And there was a lot of moving over to do, but it was good.
So how long were you in that? That was your first parish?
5 years, and then we were asked to go back to the States for a few years, and did that, and it was I think you don't know where home is until you leave it. And it became very obvious very quickly that Scotland was home.
Interesting.
So we went back to the States, and then quite quickly said, actually, this is not right. We're going back, and we did.
So, am I right to think when you came back, your journey took you to the cathedral in Dublin as the associate there? So tell us about that, because that's quite a different setting for ministry. It's a team setting. It's a very liturgical setting. It's a very particular charge. Tell us a wee bit about that. Sure.
I mean, I went from an urban priority area in Falkirk, well, Camlin, because they would never forgive me if I called them Falkirk, because it's Camlin, and to the States, but then to Dunblane Cathedral, and you're right, it was a very different setting. And as I adored being in Camlin, I adored being in Dunblane Cathedral, and the colleague that I worked with is just one of those wonderful human beings in the world, to be perfectly honest. I love him. And he was an incredible mentor. So Colin McIntosh had been there for 25 years, had an incredible outlook, continued to be, he was one of those folk who said, here's where we are, but here's where we need to go. And so for 25 years, he moved people. And it felt right. So we were able to do things together. And I remember we were asked, I think 2 or 3 years into my being there, we were asked to come and do a 5-year conference on ministry and to talk about team ministry. And it was at Church's house, which was just across from the cathedral, so it wasn't a big, so we were walking across and hadn't really talked about what we were gonna say. We were just gonna talk. And we kind of had a wee conversation, and then kind of facilitated conversation. And then they opened it up for questions. And somebody said to Colin, is there anything that Sally does that rattles you? or annoys you? And I was waiting on the, no, of course not. And he pipes up and he said, yes, she has a phrase that fills me with dread. And I'm like, what? And I was, and then he said, she'll call me sometimes and say, I have a wee idea. And he said, you just feel cold. But that was the kind of, it was wonderful. It really was. So I absolutely loved it. Felt it was a very different space because it's a cathedral, but it's also a parish church and very much bedded into that community, a part of that community. You know, and so that was a really different space. So the building is owned by Historic and Environmental Scotland, but it's the parish church. So learning to navigate that territory was also a really big learning curve.
Yes, yeah. Yes. So 10 very happy years.
Very happy years.
At the cathedral in Dunblane, and then your ministerial path takes a wee change and a turn. Quite a change and a turn. So tell us about why that came about.
Well, about 5 years into my time at Dunblane, I was asked to be the convener of the Church and Society Council. So at that point, there were 5 councils in the church. The Church and Society Council was the forward-facing council, so dealt with issues of poverty, liaised with the Westminster government, with the Scottish government. We worked with climate change, had the education committee. So it was very much a forward-facing political engagement space. Yeah. And so I convened that council for 4 years. During that time, and again, it was one of those just vertical learning curves, you know, put into spaces and alongside folk that, you know, it was an absolute honor to walk with and to learn from, and then to be able to participate and add my insights and lived experience. And then about 2 years into that, I was asked to go with Christian Aid to Bolivia. I'd already gone to Israel in the occupied Palestinian territory on a trip, and then we went to Bolivia, and seeing that work in action really lit my fire. You know, there was very much a partnership model, so it wasn't about saying, we here in the UK have expertise that we are going to generously share with you. That was completely opposite. It was, you have expertise and lived experience that we need to respect and come alongside, and so that's the partnership model. And I was really committed to that. And when Colin McIntosh retired, it felt, loved the person that came in after him, but thought, actually, I've done what I need to do here, and you feel a pull to leave. Mm-hmm. You know, and it's a different feeling. It wasn't a, I need to go, it was a, it's time, and there's something pulling me somewhere else. And I decided to have a chat with Kathy Galloway because I had been to Bolivia with her, and she had made that move out from out with the church. And we met for coffee, and we're talking about, you know, next moves and stuff, and I said, you know, and I told her how I was feeling and would love her insight, and she just kind of looked at me funny and said, you do know I'm retiring next year. And I said, no, I had no idea you were retiring next year. And she was the head of Christian Aid in Scotland. And so I applied and got that role. And I've been there for 8 years. And it has been, again, a totally different space to be in. You know, had line managed volunteers before, but I had never in my life line managed staff, which is a totally different thing. And so had to really lean into that. And learn and be careful to listen and say, this is a different space. And I need to learn. So that was really exciting. Yeah.
Sally, I'm quite keen to know how it has felt. I mean, when one is a minister, it's such a part of your life. And that sense of call to a place is such a part of your life. and it can be very difficult and decombobulating when you start to feel that change and all of that goes on. And yet you were called to a different, you were called to a different role, and yet you remain a Church of Scotland minister. How has it made a difference to your role being a Church of Scotland minister, or has it affected, has your current role given you pause for thought about what it is to be in the ministry of the Church of Scotland as you now are moderator and look out at the church as a whole? I wonder what reflections, being the head of Christian Aid, you know, a body and an organisation that churches all over Scotland and indeed the United Kingdom as a whole are passionate about and, you know, fundraise for. But it says, as you say, it's a different space. I wonder what reflection it's given you on the space of the wider church itself.
I'll be honest, at the very beginning, there was a bereavement for that part of the parish, that very intense community that you were part of and embedded in those bricks. And I didn't expect that. And I think it took me a couple of years to kind of transition into that space. But the community is people. It's always people. And there are 41 sponsoring denominations for Christian Aid. The Church of Scotland is key. In fact, the birthplace of Christian Aid was the Church of Scotland, because Douglas Lister was the chaplain who said after World War II, there are people suffering, and we need to do something about that. And that was the birth of Christian Aid. It was a response, an organic response to refugees after World War II, and we have evolved over 75 years to now work in 29 countries, you know, and that evolution has been with those denominations. So, you know, from a Christian Aid perspective, and I hope from the Church of Scotland perspective, and I want to make sure that we always keep that so tightly connected. We are the Church of Scotland, and the Church of Scotland is Christian Aid, and we don't exist without them. I think sometimes that's a challenge, and I'll, because the hub is in London, and so I'll be really honest, sometimes it's difficult to translate some of the things that happen in this space into a very different governance structure for the Church of Scotland. The center of gravity politically is Holyrood. We've got, so I'll give a for instance, and I might be rambling, so you can pull me back.
No, it's fine, it's good.
So in regards to climate change, the Scottish government targets are ahead of the UK. And some of the stuff that was coming from Christian Aid was actually feeling quite insipid in Scotland. So there was a translation that had to happen. In Scotland, if you roll back a few years with the refugee crisis, one of the things that we were doing in Christian Aid was a campaign called Change the Story.
Yes. Which
was challenging negative press about refugee and asylum. And when it came to us in the Scotland team, we said, well, we actually can't do it that way because the press is not negative here. And it's going to jar, and it's going to be quite counterproductive. So we had to shift it. So there was a translation piece to be done. So I think, and we've been working very closely with our colleagues across the UK to make it translate into different spaces in the UK. We've also had a huge shift over, and I've stepped back from it, so it's a year out, but a huge shift from being an international development charity based in the UK that works in 29 countries to being a global charity that works in 29 countries that has a base in the UK. And that may sound very, very similar, but it's quite significant. And it's moving away from a colonial model. It's being intentionally anti-racist, which is a challenge when you don't even know you're being racist. Mm-hmm. And for Christian Aid to say out loud, there are racist elements and colonial elements in the model that we have, and we must shift it if we're going to genuinely fulfill our mission, has been, I think, an incredibly bold and brave move. And it shifted the ground across the UK because we've become much more holistic. And I think COVID, in the horror that was COVID, we also became a much more naturally global organization because we were all in one place. We were all in different places, but on the same playing field rather than a center in one place and everybody else trying to feed in from where they were. So it shifted the ground.
Interesting. So how did it happen then? How did you land up taking your sabbatical from Christian Aid Scotland and landing up here with us? What happened, and how did it happen in your own mind?
It was, I will be really, really honest with you, it was so unexpected. You know, I got a phone call, we were actually on holiday, got a phone call from somebody who said, we'd like to put your name forward as a nomination for moderator. Would you let us do that? I said, let me think about that. Talked to my husband, and at that point too, which was really weird, he's a parish minister, he was retiring. So we were already looking at a move out of a 5-bedroom sandstone manse that we had just kind of spread ourselves out in. So all this
stuff everywhere,
so
isn't it? It's a nightmare.
Ridiculous.
I know.
Ridiculous stuff. So we were already dealing with that. And then I said yes, that that would be fine. And then I think the way they do it, I think you shortlist, and then there was an interview, and at that interview I thought, if I have been completely myself, and we'll see what happens. And I felt quite at peace.
I have once served on the committee that selects the moderator, and to be honest with you, it's a miracle I think anybody gets picked for it. So when you see all the machinations, when you see all the machinations that go on, it's a wonder anybody gets asked. Yeah. But fortunately, you did, and you're here. But I mean, I suppose for some people, having served in the parish in the way you did, and very committed, and then you take a step to ministry in a different setting, I suppose some people might have thought, well, put it this way, some people, having moved out of the church, the institutional space of church, might have been reluctant to step back into it, even for a year, having made that move out. But I mean, I think it's great that you did and you have, and I think it's good for the church. But I wonder, I mean, did you think, I don't mean did you think like that, but did you think about that? I mean, did it feel complicated because you worked for Christian Aid, or did it, there obviously didn't seem to be a gap in your mind between where you were working for Christian Aid and the Church of Scotland. Sure. And you in the church. No,
I very definitely saw my work with Christian Aid as serving the Church of Scotland. That gap never happened. I always felt I was fulfilling my ordination vows in the way I'd been called to. And I think our future and our present, our future, our everything has always been ecumenical. You know, the word means the whole inhabited earth. That's the root of ecumenical. That's what that means. And so to be able to serve 41 sponsoring churches as a minister in the Church of Scotland felt like an incredible honor. And I stayed rooted in that space. And I also loved the Church of Scotland. I mean, it welcomed me with open arms, you know, and I never felt genuinely, because folks have asked me that question, you know, as somebody from South Carolina, didn't you always feel kind of on the no, I genuinely didn't. And I don't think I was being naive. I really did feel, no, you are part of this. So when I was asked, I thought, this is this incredible honor. And if a committee thinks that that's the right choice, then I'll go with it. And if they don't, then that's absolutely fine, and they'll have made the right choice. And I love where I am. So you can't lose.
No. It's just that, sometimes one wonders if ministers leave parish ministry, go do something else, and then, that, not that they're lost to us, but, for instance, we've a lot of chaplains say in this presbytery who we don't see much, well, partly because of a busy life in their own, but if when they come to presbytery, when they participate, I always think they bring a lot too. And of course, very lucky, my colleague here in London was a chaplain, now serving at St Columba's, and obviously, like you, bring something from that wider working life and perspective, ecumenical, and it's just about how I think the church wins by having, those. It's not outside perspectives, because you still, as you say, you still belong, but you're slightly in a different space. So one of the things, coming back to thinking about this year as moderator, one of the things that struck me was the tagline that you chose for the year, which was the tagline for the General Assembly was, "Remember who you are." Tell us what that tagline is about and why you chose it.
And the principal clerk, the ecumenical officer, and David can snooze now because they've heard this so many times, and I feel so sorry for them. My grandmother used to, that was her mantra. She had two mantras, both equally annoying when you were a teenager. But one was, remember who you are. And it was always on the end of, you'd be walking out to go do something fun with your friends, and my grandmother would say, have fun, behave yourself, remember who you are. And it was like, well, thanks, because, now we can't have fun because we have to remember who we are. But it stuck. And I associate that so closely now with communion. Do this and remember me. And it isn't about some sort of, distant, vague recollection. It is remember me. Bring me back into this space. Remember the love, the life, the lessons, the feeding, the healing, the forgiving, the inclusion, the political will. Remember me. And so I think we have been in the Church of Scotland, and so it was one of the reasons I thought, okay, maybe this is a space I could do something in. We have been through a really rough time, along with other mainline denominations, a really hard time. And that restructure has been painful for people. But we need to remember who we are, and remember why we're here, and raise the gaze. And there's a big wide world out there, and there are people who need us, and we have something incredible to offer. And we can't do it the same way, and we shouldn't, but we need to remember that we are part of the body of Christ, and called into that space wherever we find ourselves to remember him. And so that was the theme for the General Assembly, and a call to yes, this has been tough, but let's not conflate. I think we need to really challenge our narrative. Our own narrative annoys me.
Well, I'm glad you. Now let's get. Here we go. This is the real deal. Let's get into it. I agree with you. I mean, I'm like you. I love the Kirk. I love the Church of Scotland. I just. And I can't be done with all the negativity. I can't be done with all the naysayers. Listen, it's a very difficult space. We live in a secularizing society. It's never been a harder time in a way, the mood music. But, there are no magic wands to change the church's fortunes or any of that. And what I liked about your theme was I felt it brought us back to Christ. I felt it brought us back to our vocation, but I also felt it was affirming, because I think one of the difficulties about being the church in our time is that, and it's actually one of the things I think ministers struggle a lot with. You feel this constant expectation to change it, to make it better, to turn the fortunes round, or whatever, however it's phrased and pushed, as if, you know, you can turn the tide of history and popular culture, you know. But there's all this expectation, and it leads to this sense of, well, we are where we are because actually we're not good enough, or because it must be something to do with it. I remember speaking to a minister who retired, you know, and he said, and he was a very able person, and he retired with this sense of, I don't think I've been very good, or my generation's been very good, because actually the church we're leaving is not the church we came into. As if they could be held accountable for this great. And I loved your sense, because it speaks of having a confidence about who we are. I mean, who do you think the Church of Scotland is? Who do you believe we are, and what is it in ourselves you feel that we have still to offer the world?
We're servants. We're here to serve each other, to share the love of God, and to live that out. I think rather than, and I'm not saying anything I haven't said out loud several times before, so
sorry, it's a private conversation.
No,
Nobody
it's not. No, I think we've at our peril, we equate success with numbers on a Sunday morning, because that's not success. I think we measure our success by how we serve and what is happening in our communities because of what we do. That's what we're here for. And I think if we can circle around that again and remember that and live that, then God will take care of the rest. If we focus on growth and plan, and it's important, so I'm not poo-pooing it, but I'm saying if we obsess about numbers and, you know, then we're circling around the wrong things, and we're sleepwalking into irrelevance. And we are not irrelevant. I mean, if you look at, and I think we have to go further, so I'm very much in an activist political space. I don't think we should shy away from that ever. You know, but if you look at what's going on in the Church of Scotland and other faith communities in Scotland and in the UK, you know, we're facing a cost of living crisis. The Kirk is providing food banks, warm banks, safe spaces, homeless shelters. It's not enough, because what we need to also say to our politicians and to our government is, why are we doing this? Why in the world are we doing this? You're making political decisions on our behalf that are making us spend our time on food banks and warm banks and safe spaces and homeless shelters, when that is not a sustainable solution in anybody's book. So let's get with the program and do something politically different. But we're doing that. That's extraordinary. We are relevant in our communities, and we need to stay that way, and we need to celebrate it and say, look at what the church and other faith communities are doing. I also think in Scotland, and I'm not as familiar with the wider interfaith space, but there is a huge opportunity in a small country like Scotland to really embrace that interfaith momentum that says, not in our name, and also we stand together, we act together, we speak together. We need to find ways to do that more flexibly, because we tend to, I know this will shock you all, we drown in our own bureaucracy. We need to find ways to stop that so that we can move flexibly together when we can, and default needs to be we do it together rather than could we maybe do it together. Yes, of course we can. And we amplify our voice and magnify our impact when we do that.
So do you see your year as moderator as an opportunity then, amongst other things, and all the things you have to do, to try and help the church reimagine that narrative and change the narrative from one of what you might say is what we lack all the time, to actually thinking about what we're called to do, service, being a bit more self-confident. I mean, when you go out and about, How do you find the church at large? Do you find people receptive to it? Has the church you've met out and about, well, I recognise you're only halfway through, but has anything surprised you about it, or how has it seemed to you when you get out and about?
I have to say, and I have to be, what I continually find myself saying is, do you realize how amazing you are? Do you realize what you're doing in this space? And, yes, these challenges are extraordinary, but they always have been. If they always have been. I mean, we focus on where we are, of course we do. Challenges have always been extraordinary, but we meet them, or we don't, and we have a choice. I find myself challenging the narrative when folks say, our church is closing. Well, actually, I'm looking at your church, and you don't look closed to me. Your building is being considered, but your church is not closing because you're standing right in front of me. The church is here. The building might be, but we got a gazillion buildings, crying out loud. We've got so many buildings. And that has to do with our history. And I don't think we realize, that we came back together with all these buildings, and we don't need them all. And it's a terrible indictment on our carbon footprint and our eco-credentials to have 6 churches you could throw a rock and hit, and we're heating them all. There's no point in that. So rather than being dragged kicking and screaming into that space, I think we should embrace it and say, we're letting go of a whole lot of energy that we don't need to have invested in a building, and we're investing it in people. Because the people are doing an amazing job, and we need to find new ways of doing it with our siblings, ecumenically and interfaith, because that's the future. But we shouldn't be scared of it.
I'm going to open to the floor in a minute, so 2 seconds, I'll come to you. Just before we open to the floor, are you enjoying it?
Yeah.
Is it fun?
It is fun.
Good.
And I'm going to do a shout out to my colleagues, because they have made it a joy. We have fun. At the General Assembly, I don't know if any of you know, there's a big red button at the front. It's the mute button. And it saved our lives because, it was fun, but the principal clerk and I have a mutual habit of giggling, and we both snort when we giggle. And so there were times when I was just like, I really don't know what's going on. We need to stop. But no, we're having a lovely time. And it's been, again, anytime you get to encounter and be with people, it is a joy. It's a joy. So yes, I've enjoyed it. It has reminded me of why I went into the parish ministry in the first place, and I think that's been a gift, because I have been out of it for 8 years and have missed it. So yeah, it's been wonderful.
Great. Okay, we'll open some questions to the floor. Jamie, you're ready and poised to go.
Thank you, Scott. Thank you, moderator. I don't ask easy questions.
Oh, good.
Interesting to what you were saying about racism and your tagline, remember who you are. We all, well, mostly all of us here, if not all, are British, but we are also Scottish, English, Welsh, and Irish.
Yep.
And I just wondered, from your perspective as an American living in the UK, we're all proud of our roots, kind of thing. And I just wondered if you could tell me when patriotism becomes, or the slippery slope to my favourite phrase of the moment actually, is idolatrous nationalism, my country, right or wrong.
Yeah.
We thought we'd start with an easy question.
Thank you. Thank you for the gentle intro. No, I agree with you, and I think there is that. We are one, and I think we fool ourselves if we fall into that. We are one tiny, fragile, completely interrelated global neighborhood. There is no way that anything that happens in one place is going to impact somewhere else. And when we go down that line of extreme, my space is right regardless, we dehumanize everybody else. And it becomes very easy to forget that when you look into the eyes of another human being, you are looking into the eyes of God. And how you respond to that person at that moment is holy ground. We forget that at our peril. We really do, because we are genuinely, I mean, the other theme or holding space for this year is I went back to my Christian Aid roots, and there's a Zulu phrase, again, my colleagues can nap, Ubuntu, which means I am because you are. And for me, that is deeply theological and an underpinning for our response to being part of the body of Christ. We cannot be human beings by ourselves. We depend on that community. I think also, and this is probably a little bit of a side space to what you've asked, but if you wanted to know what I think is the most dangerous thing in the world today, it is fundamentalism of any kind. When you think you have the one answer, and that means that everybody else is wrong, and you don't have to listen to them anymore. And actually, if they were gone, then your answer would prevail. That's terrifying. And we all have to own it. So, that would be where I would say we need to be very, very careful and very honest with each other. If I think I have the one answer and nobody else has any point to make, then we lose sight of each other, and we lose sight of God.
Thank you. Any other questions? Yeah.
Hi, moderators. It's nice to see you down here.
Oh, it's good to see. Hello.
Hello. You, I think, are going to be the first moderator who is going back from the moderatorial chair to Christian Aid. What are you going to take back to Christian Aid? Because this must be a very important, it's not a sabbatical, it's a very different kind of year out. But tell us what you think you have enriched in this year in terms of going back into Christian Aid.
That's a great question. I mean, I think, and I'll caveat that first with my team in Scotland have done an extraordinary thing for Scotland and for me by all stepping up into a space. So one of my colleagues from my senior management team, Val Brown, has stepped into the role of head of Scotland, and everybody else stepped in. And so it will be a very different team, and I am cognizant of the fact that I can't just swan back in and say, oh, I'm back. That would be disrespectful in the extreme and counterproductive. So we're going to need to navigate that territory together and say and I need to take time and say, what does this look like now? What is the atmosphere like? What's changed since I've been gone? Because I genuinely said, to do this properly, and for you to do it properly, I need to step away and not keep sticking my oar in unhelpfully. So I have not had anything to do with what's been happening. What I think I might bring back is a renewed determination that we partner with our churches, that it is a partnership, that we need to be really careful that we don't slide into, because of capacity issues or time issues or just pragmatism, an extractive model that just says to the denominations, can you just do this for us? It's a partnership. And so to be reminded of that on this side of things, I think has been helpful. And so I hope that I can bring that back into the space. But I also realize I need to be very respectful of what's happened in the 14 months that I've been gone.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm loving your social media activities. It's great. Just want to say that's very encouraging. Two sort of questions is, one, you're doing a lot of the interfaith work, which is fantastic. Could you say a little bit about the churches which are, I see as non-denominational, say in the Edinburgh space, the bigger independent, maybe evangelical churches, City on a Hill, all those sorts of churches, and what happened to Val, the lonely Scottish student?
Oh,
Oh yeah, I was going to ask about
All
Val
right.
too, but
yeah.
I didn't like.
No, Val, the lonely Scottish student, was the minister in our next door parish in the south of Glasgow, and we reconnected.
Brilliant.
So she's doing great. She's retired now, but we reconnected, and it's been wonderful. So she is was a parish minister, came back to Scotland, got her doctorate in the States, and then came back to Scotland. So that's Val. That's Val. I think in regards to the independent, we've got a lot of work to do, and I think, again, John McPake, who's our ecumenical officer, is here tonight. We've got a lot of work to do to draw in that energy. I think ACTS, which was Action of Churches Together in Scotland, and we were talking about that earlier today, began at the same time as Churches Together in England and other ecumenical bodies. It started with 9 members. It petered out with 9 members. Now, something didn't work. So how do we engage and convene a space that empowers everybody? And I think we're working on that, and there are lots of different things that happen in Scotland. Scottish Faith Action on Refugees, Eco-Congregation Scotland, the Scottish Church's Parliamentary Office, that are default ecumenical. But that overarching body tends to be, right now, Churches Together in Britain and Ireland. But there is a new Scottish Church Leaders Forum that actually is beginning to navigate that territory in a different way, and a much more relational, just coming alongside each other way, and it's been much more open.
Anyone else have a question?
Oh, no.
Fiona's the plant. She's the planted question.
It's me, actually. It's not Betsy. Well, I'm being a bit cheeky because obviously I'm here with the moderator, but it's wonderful to be here in Crown Court. I have to say I have never been in this church, and that's dreadful because I was baptised and grew up at Pont Street. And I just want to ask for repentance and forgiveness for my brothers and sisters here in this building. And when I arrived here, Betsy, who's known me all my life, has come from Pont Street, and it's just an absolute joy, so that belonging. But what I really wanted to say, moderator Sally, is just to tell everybody here that when Sally described her, I would say categorically it was a call from the Lord for her to be our moderator. I, as Principal Clerk, had the privilege of convening the committee, and I've just done it again this year, and we're changing the regulations, we keep mixing it up. But from the beginning, it was the call about remember who you are, and I am because you are. And that is in the heart of who Sally is. And it's an absolute joy to have been there at the interview and to have been moved deeply by the Holy Spirit. And she is called to be our moderator, and I'm very, very proud to have accompanied her at my first General Assembly as a proper Principal Clerk. Last year I was like the article clerk. Although I'd been on the top table in other guises before. So to hear Sally this evening reminding you all and reminding me of what is in her heart and what she is doing as our moderator has been a real gift for me, and I think you will all agree we are very blessed to have our moderator.
Blessed to have
Well,
you.
indeed. A glass of wine awaits us down the stairs. Yeah, oh yeah, you're in the big smoke now. And so a glass of wine awaits us. Any last question before we call it a night up here? No? Yeah, please do, Ross. Yeah, and, well, 2 more. Perfect.
Absolutely.
Ladies first.
I don't know what I dropped, but the microphone.
It's working anyway, so you're fine.
Found it. Yeah, it's fine. Yes, just reiterate what Fiona said. Yes, I have known her all her life. I taught her in Sunday school, I think, at one point too. So it was real joy that she was promoted to what she's now doing. One of the things that I understand is very close to your remit and your heart is homelessness. And I have the doubtful privilege of chairing the Benevolence Committee at St Columba's, and we dish out a lot of money over the year to try and help homeless people in different ways, mostly through Borderline, Scots Care, sorry, but through other agencies as well. We remark frequently that there seems to be an absolute hemorrhage of Scots coming to London thinking that this is going to be the best thing that's ever happened to them. And we just wonder sometimes, is there some way that this tide can be stemmed, that something is going wrong somewhere, that people feel they have to run away, and that London's going to be wonderful, and they find it's not, and they're sleeping on the pavement along the Strand, or all sorts of places.
Absolutely. And I'd want to bring a global perspective to that phenomenon. And it's about urbanization and that pull into a space where people feel there will be more opportunity. In a global space, you see that especially in regards to climate chaos and the pressure on land. It drags people away from more rural spaces into those urban contexts where there's no panacea there. It's just as terrible. It breaks up families. It means especially that men leave to go and try to get help or work or money or food in an urban space, and they leave women and children behind, which makes them even more vulnerable. You see that. I saw that in the States in my early career. People going to Atlanta for the very same reasons. There've got to be more opportunities there. So I will go where the opportunities are, and they find that actually there are no opportunities. There's just a mass of humanity with the same issues. So I think one of the things we can do is address that in Scotland by providing, and I think that's happening, trying to make sure that we address some of those social issues there. I know there's extraordinary pressure on the budget. I know one of the things that we're doing, and it's not directly associated to homelessness, but again, it is to that cycle of low pay and work that's sporadic. We've done some work with the Catholic Church and Crossreach and the Jewish community to push back to ask for fair pay for social care. Crossreach is one of the biggest social care arms, but people are not making the money that they need to live. It's hemorrhaging out the side, so you've got very vulnerable people being left with nobody there to help because they can make more money stacking shelves at Tesco's than they can looking after our most vulnerable citizens. It's a crisis. 85%, 86% of people in social care workers are female. It's a highly gendered issue. So the complexity of the political decisions that we make that drive homelessness and in-work poverty, we need to have political solutions. I think when we say that I get infuriated by poverty as a lifestyle choice. It's a political choice. We are making political choices that drive these things. It is not I don't know very many people who choose to live in a tent. Doesn't sound like a choice to me.
Ross?
This is going to seem very facile after that question, but I was interested when you said you went to the States with your husband and family and decided, within a couple of years or whatever, that you wanted to come back to Scotland in that time. Because it must have been tempting in the States, because the church is bigger, it's probably growing more, to be more involved in a more burgeoning church than going back to the Church of Scotland, which, as we know, has had its problems. I mean, I just wondered what drove that? Was it just was it the family side of it, or was it just that your family felt more connected in Scotland, or was there any other aspects to it?
Sure. And I'll be really honest. We went back to the buckle of the Bible Belt, where I'd grown up. But what I went back to was my experience, and our experience as a family was revisiting questions I thought were long since responded to in regards to the place of women in the church, and I didn't particularly want my daughters growing up in that space. We've spent at least 70% of our time, and it was and I did it willingly and joyfully, but I thought this is just a cycle, shoring up a terribly broken political system, and a non-existent health service, and the inhumanity that manifests itself in that space was extraordinary and relentless, and didn't feel like that was where my call was. And we made a choice at that point, and we made a choice with our daughters, who said, Scotland is home, and we want to go back, and you don't ignore that. And we had to make a choice soon, because we were about to hit the educational space where there was no choice. So we came back, and we made the right choice. And I'll be really honest as well. One thing I learned in that experience is when your gut tells you something, listen. There was understandable, and we've had lovely, wonderful conversations and healing conversations. There was extraordinary pressure from my family to go back. And so when that offer came, and it was an unexpected offer, when that offer came, there was a big, of course you'll come. Of course you'll come home. There was this real gut thing saying, this feels funny. But we attributed it to nerves and thought, oh, come on, embrace an adventure. It wasn't nerves. It was not the call. And I know that may sound hokey, but we were not called to that place. We weren't called there. No.
Well, one way or another, really, the whole conversation tonight has gone round and brought us. We started at belonging, and here we are finishing with belonging. And gosh, we're glad you came back, you and Stuart. And I think Fiona's absolutely right. When last year, when the news came out that you had been chosen, I thought, gosh, we're extraordinarily lucky to have you, and we are. So I want, on behalf of everyone here, to thank you for coming tonight, but also for being the moderator this year. Also to thank you for reminding us who we are and reminding us to have confidence in ourselves and the one who calls us. And I really just would like to invite everyone. Thanks to all of you for coming. Thanks to those who've joined us online. And please offer the moderator our thanks.
Thank you.
Perhaps before we go down for a glass of wine, would you like to say a wee blessing for us?
I would absolutely love to. And can I say genuinely, the honor has been mine. And thank you for coming and sharing your time with me. It's been a real joy. It's been a real joy. Okay. This is a blessing that I stole from a friend, so I can't take credit for it. But it really resonated with me because I think it says who we are. And for me, anytime we are together like this, it is worship. You know, if it's a conversation, if it's prayer, if it's, you know, liturgy, it's all about that space where we encounter each other, and when we encounter each other, we encounter God. So this blessing, I think, works for us. So it's this. The worship is over. Let the service begin. Beloved of God, go in peace. And may the God who loves you, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, go with you this night and forevermore. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you, Scott.
Thank you. Please feel free to make your way down the stairs. The gallant choir are practicing their carols. So, if you can't understand it, at least you'll know the tunes.